welcome again, everybody, to Washington Diocese School for Christian Faith and Leadership, second part of Welcoming and Belonging in the Digital Sphere. We hope you had a good week. And before we begin, let's let us welcome the Holy Spirit among us. God, our Creator, by your Spirit, the whole body of your people is called to community and belonging. We are called to be in relationship with you and with one another. Hear our prayers, for which we offer for all members of God's people. And let us pray especially for those who are in the wake of the hurricane down south. In fact, some members can't join tonight because of that. So, in the name of the one who made us, redeems us, and sustains us. Amen. We welcome back to our part two, Jerusalem Greer, who's a staff officer for evangelism in the office of the presiding bishop, and who's, I believe, ready to take us away. Jerusalem?
Good to be back together and to see everyone. We are going to start with very similar to how we did last week, as we start this second part of welcoming and belonging, by overviewing our time together, just so you kind of know how tonight will go. We're going to go through specific kind of the highlights of tonight's workshop are makings of a good host, makings of belonging. Of course, we'll have breakout groups, Q&A, share resources. We'll also do a little bit of review of last week and get the chance to share some of our learnings in the week in between our time together. But before we all do that, I would like us to really dig down and do some reflection and connection again through kind of a mini version of Lectio Divina. And we have a passage here for us to reflect on tonight. And of course, you'll be able to read it as our volunteers read it audibly for us. So I just invite you to, again, as Lee kind of prepared us, make yourself comfortable wherever you are. And you can close your eyes, you can follow along with the reading. And just let this passage wash over you. And as Kent comes to read for us, just listen for what word or phrase stands out to you. And then add that. So I'm going to start.
A reading from the book of Deuteronomy. Can you hear me, Jennifer?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes.
Because the Eternal's territory is his people, and Jacob is the territory of God's inheritance. The Eternal found Jacob out in the wilderness, out in an empty, windswept desert wasteland. He put his arms around him and took care of him. He protected him as the apple of his eye. Just as an eagle stirs up its nest, encouraging its young to fly, and then hovers over them in case they need help, and spreads its wings and catches them if they fall, and carries them up high on its wings. So the Eternal guided Jacob through the wilderness, without the help of any foreign god.
Thank you. So what words or phrase did you hear that stood out to you? You'll add those in the chat. Any foreign god, he puts his arms around him, out in the wilderness, took care of him, guided Jacob. The Eternal's territory is his people, guided through, encouraging its young, in case they need help. Empty, windswept desert wasteland. catching them if they fly, if they fall. Yeah, these are good. It's always beautiful to hear what comes up in these readings. I'm now going to ask Mary to read it for us a second time. This time, just listen with open curiosity about what the Spirit might be saying to you through those phrases and words that stood out to you, and how maybe that applies to the things we've been talking about welcoming and belonging. So Mary, I invite you now.
A reading from the book of Deuteronomy. Because the Eternal's territory is his people, and Jacob is the territory of God's inheritance. The Eternal found Jacob out in the wilderness, out in an empty, windswept desert wasteland. He put his arms around him and took care of him. He protected him as the apple of his eye. Just as an eagle stirs up its nest, encouraging its young to fly, and then hovers over them in case they need help, and spreads its wings and catches them if they fall, and carries them up high on its wings. So the Eternal guided Jacob through the wilderness, without the help of any foreign god.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. If you have any reflections you'd like to share on the connections that are cropping up, bubbling up, feel free to put those in the chat as well. Happy to have those. I'm going to stop sharing just for one moment because I think that my email is making a lot of noise. I accidentally left it open. So it's closed now, and we can go back. All right. Okay, great. Oh, I love some of these reflections. The wings catching them means we belong to God and that God cares. Yeah, and that find those who are looking or lost and welcome them and embrace them. The Eternal found Jacob in the wilderness. He didn't just wait for Jacob to show up at the door. Thank you. God carries him up high. Again, this image of the territory. God's territory is his people, not a place. It keeps resonating with people, which I just love. Thank y'all for that. Well, hold on to that, because we're going to come back and connect with it a little bit during our breakout time. And thank you to our volunteers tonight for their time. Okay, so we're going to jump in here and talk a little bit about what makes a good host. Last week, we talked about kind of the why we need welcoming and belonging, and what it means during this time, especially of being kind of dispersed and disconnected. And so now we're going to jump into kind of the how. Okay, so we know people are lonely. We know people feel disconnected. We're ready to start thinking about our digital spaces the way we would our buildings, with making sure our signage is good and those sorts of things. We're ready to start talking to each other and our people about how to invite people in. So let's say we do these things. Let's say we get the house ready, right? And we send out the invitations to the party, and then people show up. What happens then? What happens when the people show up? And some of them are already showing up, right? I mean, I know a lot of you have people showing up at your services from all over the place. So what can we do, like any good kind of host, to make people feel welcome and make them feel like they are a part and included and welcomed and can belong here if this is the place for them? So the first thing we're going to look at is the makings of a good host, aka what I call the digital greeter. I don't know, every church does it a little bit differently. In our parish, we have what's called ministry teams, and there's a different team for each week of the month, so the first week, second week, etc. And they're made up of ushers and the altar guild and greeters and lectors, and they all serve on a team together. And that greeter role is very important, because for a lot of people coming in, most people actually, except for maybe those of us who get there super early, the greeter is really the first person to open the door, to say, welcome, here's a bulletin, here's a name tag, can I help you? Those sorts of things. And so what does that look like in a digital space? I chose this verse from Luke, even though it's not a throwaway verse necessarily, but it's part of a larger story, of course. But I love this. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. I just think it's a beautiful image. How many times in Scripture is welcome talked about, right? And Martha welcomed Jesus into her home. A digital volunteer or a digital greeter is a volunteer who offers the same services online that they would in person. And maybe you don't call yours greeters, maybe you have another name for them, but whatever that is, this is what they do. They welcome people, they assist people, they connect people, and they give the salutation, right? It's not just welcome, we're so glad you're here, but it's also have a good week. A digital verger could be some language for this. Maybe your ushers usually do double duty, and so this is part of that. But this is what a digital greeter does, and this is what makes a good host. So here, what's a digital greeter profile? Let's say you're going to put out a one ad for a digital greeter, and you need to write like the profile of this job. Well, it's real complicated. You have to be highly skilled, and there's three main things. You have to be able to be present for the real-time services. You need to have access to the chat box for the service. And you need to have access to the resources to share with participants. The great thing about digital greeters is that maybe people who would be shy in person actually come out of their shell a little bit in some digital spaces. And so really, this is kind of tongue-in-cheek that you only need these three things. You do need people that are friendly and welcoming and outgoing, but this can be a great place for people who have been a little bit nervous about doing this in person can have the opportunity to shine. So the first one is the people need to be present for services and events in real time. What I mean by that is, like, for instance, my parish records their services on Fridays. They don't do them live. Some people are still doing them live. Some people have found that it just works all the kinks out to record things ahead of time. Regardless of where that is, you're probably still, doing a Facebook live stream, etc., in real time on the Sunday morning or whenever your service time is. And so even though the service is run pre-recorded, you still need an active chat box. Real live people still need to be there engaging with whoever is attending the service during that time. So that's one thing. People just need to be able to be present for the live service times. The next thing is this chat box idea. The chat box really is the best place to make connections and engagements during a service. So for instance, if you're on Facebook in an ideal situation, maybe you would have access, like the church Facebook would add you as a contributor. There's lots of different things you can be added as. So you could be added maybe as a contributor or an editor. And what that would allow you to do then is chat in the chat box as the church. So it would show, if someone said, hi, I don't know where the bulletins are, the church, would be responding as, well, here you can find them. Now, some people might find that's a little impersonal, and so they want people to go ahead and act as the digital greeters as themselves. But you can do either way. For Zoom or another platform, and even if you do this in Facebook, not using the church account, make sure the greeter introduces themselves and has this is an example, like, hi everyone, I'm Betsy. Today I'm the digital greeter for St. Amelia's. If you have questions about our service or our church, I'm here to help you. And that way people kind of always know how to go back and find that in the thread, like, okay, who was it? It was Betsy. Betsy is my helper today. And of course you can reply in the chat and say, hey Betsy, I can't find the bulletin. That really establishes that personal connection. A real person is here to welcome you. It's not just a bot that's kind of auto-responding. And people, there's a real person who's excited that you have shown up at the service. The other thing a digital greeter needs to have is access to the resources to share with participants. So you just want to make sure that your digital greeter has the tools they need. So for instance, they need a link to the bulletin online. You know, you're going to get people showing up to your services who do not get your newsletter and therefore do not get the link that you send out on Thursdays, right? And so they show up and they're like, I don't know what's happening because I can't, you just said in the announcements, turn to page such and such, but I don't have that page. So just making sure they have links. If you're going to make any announcements during the service, make sure that your digital greeter has the access to all those links to put them in the chat as you announce them. If you say, please sign up for such and such, that link to that sign up form needs to go in the chat like immediately, right? And use digital visitor card. I think we kind of touched on this last week. We should all have electronic digital greeter cards. Google Forms is an easy way to create this. Super, super easy, super fast. You can have a couple of different content creators working on the same form so that you're not having to attach and fix and upload and download. It's just all kind of happening in real time. So you can do that. It doesn't cost anything, and you can have a form tomorrow for your visitors, and so that makes sure that it helps you get information about your visitors, and also say there's a way for you to go deeper. There's a way for you to connect beyond this morning. Other digital greeter tips. 1 is good, 2 is better. So you'll notice on this call, for instance, both Jennifer and Lee have been helping kind of navigate the chat and get us started, and they kind of help run some of the technical pieces. And so as a presenter, that's so helpful to me that I'm not going to have to manage all these pieces, and they're handling it. And it's also good for them to have each other's back. So if somebody's dog crashes through a window, one of them is still there to kind of keep things going, right? So if 1 is good, 2 is better. It's always okay to have maybe 2 greeters as long as they kind of know and are clear about who's doing what and they are communicating. Have your greeters offer a welcome to the service statement. Then throughout the service, maybe offer prompts or questions such as, where's everyone participating from today? Or during prayers of the people, say, please feel free to share a prayer request with us, you know, that we will add these to our prayers going forward. For instance, my parish sends out the prayers of the people, the actual list of the people every week, right? So you could add the prayers that people put in the chat to those prayers, and people will really know that you are taking to heart, right, their needs and their request. Again, add links for online giving and event registration. When it comes offering time during the service, put that in the chat, right? Here's how you can give right there in real time. If your church offers anniversary or birthday prayers, again, ask people in the chat, does anybody joining us have an anniversary or a birthday? We'll pray for you this week, and consider yourself part of this prayer that we're offering. You can also keep a spreadsheet if that's something you want to do of everyone who attends. Even if you don't have their information, you can just copy the names in the chat or who you see show up and just kind of keep track of who's showing up. If you copy and paste them directly from Facebook, it will create a link that you can go back and view their profile later. And so if you do want to send them like a message or something through Facebook later, you would have the ability to do that based on that information. And I really do think that sending follow-up messages to everyone who attends, especially visitors, is just a wonderful thing that our greeters can do, or some hospitality members of the church can do, to just say, we noticed you, and we're not asking you to join necessarily, but we just want to know that we want you to know that we're grateful and that we're here if you have any questions at all.
Jerusalem, can I have one suggestion here is, this was on another webinar led by a consultant talking about sort of amplifying your work on Sunday to extend it and connect with people throughout the week. And so the same kind of things that you're talking about, you can take your whole, let's say you record your Zoom worship, and then not just the message your homily, but if it's a 10-minute homily and you've got 2 points to that homily, you might actually take that homily and cut it into 2 and deploy one on Monday, one part of it on Monday, one part of it on Tuesday, maybe with some of those visitors, and check. And if you have a call to action in your homily, then on Wednesday, check in with the call to action, go back to look to see who's on that Facebook page and say, hey, we talked about addressing this issue during this week. How's it going with that? So find those natural ways to connect people from Sunday throughout the week with your people.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great idea. The more I can tell you right now, from the wider church office, we are working on a service that will be on All Saints Day for the entire nation. And several pieces that we are developing are, like Jennifer said, they will be developed and created not just so that that whole service can be of service on All Saints Day, but there will be smaller pieces that then churches will be able to take that will be a free gift, an open gift to the world, but especially to the wider church, can then take those smaller pieces and use them themselves. So anytime you can break up things and create more little snippets of content to build that rapport and to build that traction with people, and to continue to engage them, it's beautiful. So thank you. I love that tip. The ministry of the digital greeter, really, if you just want to kind of get down to the nugget of it, is to offer folks who feel as if they are in the wilderness opportunities for connection and community. And right now, a lot of people feel like they're in the wilderness. Some of them are going to be visitors, but sometimes that's your parishioners, right? Like, we are all kind of wilderness wandering right now as we are just in uncharted territory. So we can't choose if people are going to take us up on all the things we offer them, but we can choose to offer these things. Yes, ma'am.
There's a question. I just want to stop you for a second. And probably different viewpoints of this. There's an interesting question in the chat, which I'm scanning actively, which is, isn't all this chatting during a service disruptive? Like talking in a service? I have my own thoughts about that. Love to hear your thoughts, Jerusalem, and I'll pipe in, and Lee, you can too.
So I would say yes and no, both and. It depends on how you like to experience the worship service. And quite frankly, sitting at a computer is already very different. I have actually cooked breakfast during a worship service and found that to be very enriching actually of the entire experience. I was able to kind of dance around during the music, and I talk back to the sermon sometimes. And you can close the chat. As a participant, you are not forced to engage in the chat. You can actually minimize and close the chat. So I would say, if we were just talking about where'd you buy those shoes, yes. That might be a little off topic. That's like when the piece goes on for half an hour, right? But if we are trying to support the worship experience, then I don't think so. And again, it's an opt-in, opt-out situation. So
I think for me, thanks, Jerusalem, this is great. Yeah. I think for me, it depends upon your own congregation for sure. Amanda's said exactly what I was going to say. You can turn it off. If you don't like the chat, just close it out and then watch the service if that's what you'd like to focus on. But I think what's happening on this digital medium is we have so few cues around us of what's happening, right? And we're just looking at this one screen. I can't see where people are looking, what people are doing. And so the chat actually is that little sand that makes the pearl, right? It's like a little bit of an agitator to say, hey, look here, I'm here, and these are the things I'm thinking about. And generally my experience is in a worship service, chatting doesn't happen too frequently. But I submit a suggestion there in the chat that people are less likely now to be singing at home. I've heard that over and over and over again. So we're actually experiencing music in church as a viewer, not as a participant. So we're trying to find those ways of how do you make that connection. So you don't have those visual cues anymore to make those connections. So we're trying to use all the tools at our disposal, and chat just happens to be one of those. It's not the same as somebody else sitting next in the pew next to me whispering and having a conversation. That's distracting because I can't turn them off. But with chat, I can choose not to look at it.
Great thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can engage people. I think the rector can, or anyone can. I love the idea of doing it during the music, because we do just kind of stare at the screen and get lost.
That's a great idea. Yeah, you could also time where you're adding those things, right? I think that's
Yeah, it's like,
not the
what is
middle
the
of the
music
check.
saying to you, and then have people.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so the next thing, so we've kind of thought about greeters and creating that digital greeter program. And like everything, it's contextual, right? I mean, nothing I'm saying is one size fits all. These are just kind of overarching principles or ideas to think about. So the next thing to talk about is belonging. And the verse that I chose to root us here, there's so many beautiful translations of this verse. I mean, and they're all a little bit different. But it's Psalm 68:6, and it says that God gives the desolate a home to live in. He leads the prisoners to prosperity, but the rebellious lived in a parched land. And I chose this image because I just think of all those are like different homes, right? They're different outlets, and they're different ways to plug in, and they're all a little bit different. And that last bit of that verse, the rebellious lived in a parched land. I mean, I have teenagers, so I maybe want to send them to parched land sometimes. But really, what I think about that is sometimes we're the rebellious ones. It's not the other. The other is not rebellious. I'm rebellious, and I miss out on things because I don't work with God to give the desolate a home, and that sort of thing. And so really part of what we're doing here is, even though a lot of this is way outside the box of what we've always done, it's an opportunity for us to live into just joy and belonging and transformation. That if we say, well, we're just going to wait till the pandemic's over, I think that's a little bit of living in that parched land, right? So what does that look like to create the making of belonging? So there's lots of different ideas out there, but here's a few specific ways of really connecting online and just breaking through just watching the screen on Sunday mornings, and that's all we're doing. Think about setting the lonely in families, setting the desolate in homes. What would that look like with intention in your church community? So here's one idea. And again, this is not a fix-all. It might not work for a lot of people, but let's say you have a church of 10 or more households. You might decide to divide the membership up into small groups of 5 or 7 households each. Now, of course, if you only have 10, maybe that's just 2 groups, or maybe you have groups of 3 households. But the idea is kind of like a caring for each other group, a shepherd, not a pastoral care necessarily, but just the life care. So because we're not seeing each other on Sundays, we're not seeing each other at coffee hour, we're not kind of able to keep track of each other in the same ways. So if your church hasn't really done something like this yet, isn't doing any kind of small group things, kind of the first baby step into that process can be this. So what you do is you just kind of divide them up. You can divide them up any way you'd like. You can ask people to opt into this. You can just say, this is, we're just going to put everybody in these little life groups. And you can divide them up by stage of life, and you can divide them up by geography. You can just alphabetically, just random pulling names out of a hat. There's a lot of reasons for each choice, right? Like I could spend an hour on all the different ways that you can sort small groups. But the idea behind this one is that they're just checking in on each other. They're just checking in with each other. They're just connecting. Maybe there's one person in the group or one household that kind of is taking care to make sure that the group is in somehow connecting with each other. They don't even have to be having any kind of deep get-togethers or those sorts of things. But just checking in on each other and really getting to know each other and making sure everybody's okay, who's sick and who's struggling with school and those sorts of things. People can check in with each other maybe weekly or bi-weekly on Zoom, maybe old-fashioned phone trees. I know some of you remember those. Safe outdoor meetups, or even like super closed secret Facebook groups can be a nice place for people who just can't do another like Zoom call, but they can check in with each other. And like once a week you can put out a call and go, okay, roll call, how's everybody doing? Or what's the hardest thing you've had to deal with this week? And that's, if you want to go deeper and consider offering discipleship small groups that have a more intentional faith focus, you can do that as well. And of course, at the end, we'll talk about some of those offerings, but that's one of the things. Now, the next question here, before we get to the next topic, the offering of open arms, I want to do a poll. And so Jennifer's got another poll for us, just to kind of break us out of just staring at the screen again. So that's poll 1 that's up there. All right, poll 2. This is the kind of question you could even ask in those Facebook groups and in those small groups, right? Checking in with people. Okay, so here's your poll. What have you missed most about church during the time of COVID-19? Yep.
I can't tell if people have voted, so
Oh
maybe
yeah. I think most people have voted. So
poll and share results. So Jerusalem, tell us what the results say, or tell me, because I'm evidently the only one who can't see them.
see 'em. Okay, so the first option was the building. We had 11% voted for that one. The next one was the people. That's 67%. I think right out of the gate, that's a clear winner. Live music and singing is 39%. Coffee hour got 22%. Not bad. Guilds and small groups have 0. Spiritual education got 28%, and serving in some capacity got 22%. So people, singing, followed, people was number 1, singing number 2, and then a tie for third really was coffee hours, spiritual education, and serving in some capacity, which I would say are all highly relational in a lot of ways. So thank you for that. I think we kind of all guessed that people would be the winner of that one. It definitely helps for what we're talking about tonight to kind of prove the point, right? Only 11%. Coming in next to last was the building. So I just think that's interesting, because maybe like after week 3, we would have said the building would have had a higher, a higher number. And now we're really missing the people. So that's why finding these ways of connecting online, even just the real simple check-ins, I think are just huge, because we miss people and we miss being in relationship with them. So set the lonely in families. Consider how you can go about creating some smaller communities within your community who check on each other regularly and have a lot of intentionality around that. Yes, Jennifer.
Someone had a question in the chat about that, that their current neighborhood groups are close to 12 to 15 families. And Peter, I can't tell if you mean 12 to 15 people, or do you mean families? Not small groups per se, but you'd suggest reorganizing this. Peter, you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. You know, our neighborhood groups, which were set up primarily for check-ins pre-COVID, they're bigger. And so some of them are 15 family units, essentially. And what I hear you saying is set up smaller groups that are maybe more like-minded. Our groups are geographically based. Mm-hmm. If you set up, groups of similar interests or age groups or what have you, you're saying you would rework the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're gonna, I do think smaller is better in this time frame, because 15 families, and I would be the person that would end up with 15 families in my small group because I would just keep inviting people. So I get that. But maybe dividing those in half, I mean, there's some benefit to the geography, especially if people of similar lifestyles, like lots of people with young kids live in the same area, right? Or lots of retired folks live in the same area. And so maybe it's just a matter of breaking those, having those, you know, cutting them in half. And so they're smaller groups. If you do want to do stage of life or around interest, I mean, I think, you know, you would completely kind of, I don't know if it's a second thing, you know, I can't tell you what to do. It could be a second type of group, or it might just be easiest to start from scratch. It may just be that you just need to, for the time being, just divide them by, you know, in half and have that. There's such a I have such mixed feelings about different ways of dividing. And I think it just really comes down to what the church and the congregation needs in the moment. I mean, sometimes intergenerational mixed groups are so helpful in so many ways, because you have people who have been down that road before and can say it gets better. But sometimes people just need people in their life who are in the same stage saying, I totally understand. And sometimes it's interest. Sometimes you really are going to bond more over a theme of some sort. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I would recommend smaller groups. All right. Jennifer, this is great. I love having the questions because I cannot see them and it's too many windows. So feel free to add anytime. So the next thing is to offer what I call open arms, which is just to continue to communicate things to people that you are welcoming and that you want people to ask questions and get to know them. So you could host specifically, again, thinking about things you might have done in person, how can you do them digitally? A newcomer coffee hour, where you can answer questions, share the heart of your church's ministry, and really get to know the visitor themselves. It's not a lot of our coffee hours are super fun, but it's a little insider baseball in the sense that we all know each other and we're all talking about a lot of the same things, and we have history, and so we can read all our cues from each other, even over Zoom. And so sometimes having a special coffee hour set apart just for the newcomers, with like a few of your greeters, right, who've been interacting with them online, to make them feel comfortable, can be a great way. Consider sending registration invite and link to the visitors from the names you gathered during Sunday service, or if you have an online visitor card. Other ways to connect beyond just kind of the obvious is to really have that kind of going back to that, some of our earlier scriptures, and God like taking them under the wings, right? And that his territory is people. Even if people aren't super connecting with us, having that way of thinking about them in terms of, let's pray for our visitors, right? Even if we never connect with them, if we see their names in our chat boxes or in the attendance bar, let's add them to our prayer list. Let's maybe ask our small groups to pray for these people, or our DOK. Or maybe there's some groups within our church who really like to pray together, but they've been feeling a little lost during this time. They haven't really had a mission outside COVID and that sort of thing. So they're giving them weekly names to pray for, and to give thanks for, and to intercede. Even not knowing them, I just think that's a beautiful way to be caring for our visitors, and those who are far off maybe. So the other thing is, once you do have people that are kind of engaging, they filled out a visitor card, they're showing up more than once, maybe they've come to a coffee hour, maybe then you begin to figure out how to fold them into any small groups that you have. So you could look at the demographics of how you've divided up your small groups, and then send this information, connects in a connecting email, ask somebody from that small group to intentionally offer an invitation to their next kind of online gathering, whatever that might be, and the check-in process, and do that work. And that's going to stretch some of our people a little bit to have that task. But I think it's just reminding that people are in the wilderness, and they don't need a lot, but they just need to know that they are wanted. Everyone wants to be wanted. Additionally, you can offer online inquirers classes. Again, send specific invitations to those who have visited. You can do one of the fun things that's going on right now. when we think about it, is there's so many people visiting our services who aren't really familiar with our tradition. And they don't always, and they're curious. Like when I came to the Episcopal Church, I was so, and I still remain so curious about a lot of things. And I can't tell you how many kind of lifelong Episcopalians were like, well, I don't know why we do that. We've just always done it. And I want to know all the reasons we did everything. So hosting some viewing parties of some resources, such as there's a wonderful instructed Eucharist film called How to Eucharist, and it's like pop-up video. If anybody remembers, if they're old enough to remember pop-up video from VH1, and it's broken into different parts, so you don't have to do the whole thing at once. But that can be a really fun thing to do, like a viewing party over Zoom, where you all watch portions of that, and you engage again in the chat or pause it and talk about the different parts, right? And you really get people, both newcomers and people who've been around the church for a while and might not know why we do all the things we do, to really build relationship around learning. There's also a baptism series from the Episcopal Church that's very similar. And I'm sure there's lots of resources like this where you could kind of host these. Let's explore our faith together a little bit more, or our traditions, or why do we do all these weird things? There's tons of resources out there. And then another thing is just sending mail, old-fashioned mail, which I know doesn't really fit into our digital theme, but we really are finding that mail, card ministries, not form letters, but handwritten notes. Kids really love getting mail, especially, and their parents cannot open another email. So sending mail home to families can be really fun. And I just pray that like the universe will balance out the trees for the COVID and all of that right now. Because I feel like we just got rid of mail and now here comes the mail. So these are just some things. And then I think this is the last major one before we go into our groups. Have fun and share. Share weekly challenges or activities that everyone can participate in. So for instance, during the sermon, you might ask people to post their reflections on the sermon in the chat, especially if you build in a little music after the sermon. Like you could totally do that. You could add a little bit of music and ask people though, what did you hear? Kind of like we've been doing with Lectio the past 2 weeks. Get people engaged, and there's nothing that says that we have to power through the service, right? This is the great thing about this format, is we can pause and we can all reflect together on the sermon. Host a coffee hour that's a Zoom brunch where everybody's making brunch or eating brunch. Or an evening prayer followed by make your own pancake supper. We can't all gather for our pancake suppers that we love so much, but we could all have pancakes at home after evening prayers. Invite people to set up their cameras or their computers or their phones where they're cooking and all cook together. Make use of the liturgical calendar and its traditions. Like I'm really kind of looking forward to all the creative ways people get creative once Advent starts, about how to light candles on wreaths and how you can all do that together in your homes. Like, is there going to be a countdown? We're all going to 1, 2, 3, light your first candle. For Pentecost, everyone could wear red and, you know, share their favorite spicy foods in the chat. Or make sure you post pictures of yourselves in red and where you went to church. All Saints Sunday, you can invite people to post pictures of their loved ones who have passed in the chat. And so that you're really helping this to be a more personal belonging experience, and not just consumer. Because I think one of the fears that we have right now, and fear might be a big word, but one of the challenges is that we don't want this way of doing church to just become so consumeristic, where people just show up and they watch it like they watch Netflix and they walk away unchanged, right? There needs to be still some formative and some transformational experiences going on, and that's going to take interaction. That's going to take some giving back and forth. So have fun with that. Okay, so it's now time to break into our small groups. And we're going to have about I can't see the time, but I'm assuming we'll have 10 minutes again like last time. Yeah, 10, 15 minutes. And you have 2 options for small group this time. So just because I know that we're all coming in busy weeks and different spaces. So option 1, and your group can just decide this as a group, is you can reread the passage from Deuteronomy, and we'll put this in the chat. We'll put these questions in the chat. So you can have a volunteer reread that for your group and then discuss how these verses might speak to the challenges of what we're currently living through and what people need in response to these challenges. So that's option 1, to kind of do a little bit more in-depth reflection around that passage from Deuteronomy. The second option is to share about your homework, if you did any homework. And no shame if you didn't. But what did you learn about your website or someone else's website or Facebook pages? Were you able to start thinking about creating that visual testimony / commercial, or come up with an elevator speech? And if you did, could you share those with people? So those are your 2 options.
So welcome back, and I hope that you all enjoyed your time together. And I'm just going to go down the line. I think there were 4 groups to ask if somebody could report out to the larger group. So group number 1, who's your captain?
Aye. Here I am. So group 1, we had a couple of us from the Diocese of Washington, one formerly of the Diocese of Washington, now in Southwest Virginia, and a couple of folks from Connecticut, and had a good discussion about the second question, though none of us had done our homework. Sorry to call you guys out, me included. But we had a great conversation, and I guess a few of the highlights to share. Across the board, felt like this was an extraordinary opportunity from a communications perspective. I mean, that might seem obvious, but kind of posed it as, is this a time of opportunity and growth, or is there the feeling that sometimes of being underwater and overwhelmed? Very much saw the positive side of that. And at the same time, all of us kind of acknowledged that our websites were much less kind of up to scratch than Facebook and other social media. The website that has improved a bunch, one of the websites in Connecticut, they've been very intentional about replacing pictures of buildings and kind of inanimate parts of the church with people and ministries, something that had started before the pandemic but has really become much more of a primary issue now in terms of communications. But by and large, the most successful kind of activities have really been those that really tie into worship and specific events, where that morning prayer, in one example, in Washington, the cathedral's website is really something that they've done an excellent job of highlighting worship in ways that worship has grown and people have felt much more connected. Mm-hmm. It's not simply a performance piece that people watch, but they have been clearly working very hard, not only at the worship, which they've always done, but in ways that create communities and having people's prayers be collected and shared. And at the same time, I think there's a sense of the possibility of using Facebook in ways. New ways seem to pop up every day, and I think in the best way, it's being on a really positive learning curve, where these 2 weeks and just, I think there's a way of connecting with people, but I think I'll certainly speak for me that there's a way of, when I've found ways to be connected with all of you and other people who are kind of in this intermediary role, there's an incredible spirit of generosity that I've found, particularly during these past months. And I've also just found, in a sense, from that sharing some of the best ideas. And that there's a way of feeling encouraged that, some of the best ideas really continue to be developed and lie not outside of us with experts, but really among us. And so look forward to finding a rhythm that allows us to learn from and contribute to that.
Thanks. Kim. All right. You can put yeah. So thank you. So group number 2, you're up.
How do we know our group number?
Well,
Jennifer, that's our group. You're on.
Group 2.
that's how you know.
That's how you know. I wrote it down this time.
Great, thank you. So, okay, I'm pleased to be our representative for Group 2. And we represented different states, including Texas, Maryland, and New York. If I missed one, please let me know. And it's just so wonderful hanging out with Christians, have to say. So we introduced ourselves, and then we talked about the homework, which some of us did a little bit of. The first thing was to review a website. And it was so great that one church member in a different state was looking at different websites. And one of the model websites was Trinity in Maryland. And Lee is from there and happened to be in our group. So it was pretty cool.
Christchurch.
Christchurch, wrong name? Sorry.
Christchurch, Kensington.
Christchurch, Kensington. Okay, I messed that one up totally. Did I get the state right? Okay.
Yes.
All right, good stuff. Yes, and what was key for that being a model website was the people were smiling. And Lee, it was like a great effort. You said that. Why the people were smiling?
We worked on that.
So just a great tip. And I think about that, right? When you're in a spiritual world, maybe we're looking serious or spiritual, but it's nice to see smiling faces. So a good one. Great tips about websites. And the second one was the homework on asking church members, providing them with the challenge to invite personally, one person to attend Zoom church or Facebook Live or however we're doing church now each week. And I remember Jerusalem talking about that. And if they don't come the one week, you just keep inviting more, one at a time until they come. And then you do it all over again. So just a great tip. And that challenge has definitely been done from our group. In addition to that, we shared best practices, great conversations of how we're living in this digital world that we live in. Jerusalem, I also love digital. I'm sharing that with everyone. I'm not using virtual anymore, unless it's like my virtual background. So some of the best practices were videos of people waving from their porch and then looping them together, and you get the seamless video of people from your church. Another one was videos of people singing or providing a prayer, and each person shares, they say it, but then you take parts from each person and loop them all together and then share it. And that responsibility has been shared with current parishioners or for new people who are joining, newcomers, and even if they're not local, right? This is the digital era, right? So they can be anywhere, and bringing them into the fold and getting them to sing or to do a prayer as well. So good stuff. What else? Oh, another great thing is I got this idea from my church. So I want to share this is that, okay, so now we have Zoom. We've never recorded ours. Now we can actually record it and share it on YouTube. I was just like, wow. So I'll go back and ask that idea of, my church. And and maybe doing Facebook Live. So some of us are doing, so if some of us are doing Zoom, moving to Facebook Live, that encourages visitors from all over the world. Because I guess they could just join when they're in live. So, did I miss anything? Anyone else want to add anything from our group?
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, right? Group number 3.
That's me. We had most people from the West Coast or the East Coast. I'm the only one from the smoky West Coast right now. 2 of our people did their homework and looked at their website, and Betty said she immediately saw that it featured the building and not the people, and they changed it in this last week and immediately got a lot of likes and good comments. So that just shows how powerful it is. Cynthia made a good observation that it's, and then Todd kind of followed up by saying that keeping up a website is so challenging, and that Cynthia said, but our newsletters are so current. They're what's happening now. So it might be a good place to start and be sharing and be sure that they're on your websites, because then you've got really current news. And Todd noticed, because he gets to see and counsel a lot of churches, that some churches have like 2-year-old events on their website, so it's not very exciting. And Todd mentioned that please don't put your donate button on the front page. That there's a way to put it, below somewhere or in a members page, so it's not what new people confront immediately. And that this is especially crucial with younger people seeking a church, that it feels they're very distrustful about money asked so soon. So please don't do that. Put it somewhere else. And a comment was to be sure your website works on mobile devices, because our younger people that's how they're going to look up your church. And Todd said, whatever you do, just simplify your website because of the challenges of always keeping it up. We went, and then somebody mentioned that a stumbling block for their church is finding the talent to work on their website. I happened, we're in California and we have a lot of tech companies out here. And so we have homegrown talent in our church, but I could see it's hard and could be expensive to find the right talent to look at your website. We went on to the Deuteronomy passage, and Todd read a translation that started, but Yahweh's portion is you, the people of Yahweh. And we thought that was such a beautiful version or translation. And that we talked about how sometimes in Bible studies, you'll get as many translations as possible and have people read them out, because they're different voices and they bring up different possibilities for people. And so we might be missing that online when we choose one translation, and that it might be part of the isolation is a translation being used isn't the one that resonates, just a word, like when I heard Todd say, but Yahweh's portion is you, that portion is you went to my heart. So that it could be, Miller suggested that we could put online links to other translations, or be sure that people could find the lessons read in other translations. It was suggested in our group that there is a reflective time to process the worship. Again, I think it was said earlier is that we can use this format to our advantage, and we don't necessarily have to race through. We don't have Eucharist anymore, so it's a shorter service anyway. So, and sometimes it feels too short to me. It's like I wanted just a little more. So it could be a time to allow right in your service for some reflection. And if people know ahead that they're going to have that, and it was suggested that there be some reflection questions to kind of guide those thoughts. that you will have the time to do that. And then someone, I think Todd, because he's a priest, said, be sure the sharing is not a critique of the sermon. Be sure, and that's why the reflective questions would be good, because it will guide people. So that's the notes I took. It was a very nice group. I'm glad to be there.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, it was really good though. It really helpful to me, and we all commiserated about, as Peter I think put it, the bandwidth. You know, we don't have enough volunteers. We don't have volunteers with the right kind of skills. And all of these ideas are so exciting, and we just love them all, and we have no idea who's going to do this. I mean, it's just really deer in the headlights feeling once you get past the excitement. So, but different people shared how they were doing their services. I thought, Carolyn, you had the most interesting thing, I believe, where you said that you were, I liked it because they were embedding their service from Facebook into their website. So anybody could find it there. You didn't have to have a Facebook account or a Zoom account. And I thought that was really a really good consideration there. People were doing crazy things. They were, was this my group or someone else's? But they were Carolyn, was it your rector that was doing 3 services a day?
Oh yeah, on a Sunday morning.
7:45 in the parking lot. Then a little kids service a little later on.
At 8:45, a children's mini service, and then 9:45, our main service, live stream broadcast to Zoom, Facebook Live, and simulcast to the website.
We all want the name of that rector.
You can't have it. I'm not telling you.
So anyway, so what we found out, and other people can chime in, but there were many different ways to do this. And it's you grow it yourself, and it's what your congregation can bear, basically, and it also is your congregation's culture, what they will do. And that's about all I actually remember. I'm sorry I didn't make some great notes, but Peter, do you have anything else?
I think you covered pretty much all of it there, Jane. Thank you. It was good to be in a group with 2 senior wardens, because we know who really carries the water in the church. But yeah, the bandwidth is a real thing. And so these are all wonderful ideas. I think the low-hanging fruit might just be the thing that you start with, because there's a lot. It's a lot to do.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about literal bandwidth too, the need for investment, like money to invest in technology, to get better, stronger, more powerful Wi-Fi, to get a better camera, maybe a sound mixer, whatever. But that we're being asked to consider investments that we would never have considered a year ago. And of course, the things we want to buy aren't available because they're all back ordered, because every other organization in the world is trying to buy them. So that's another issue.
And I think one of the points that Carolyn pointed out, and as did Peter and also Jane, we're lucky to have 1 or 2 tech-savvy people available to do the work, but then we realize they can't go on vacation ever. So you become key person dependent. Oh. So they can't go on vacation, period, ever.
Gary.
Thank you all. And I think that that's a really good thing, Peter, for your group as well, all of you, to mention that it's good to harvest all these ideas and then sort of make a plan, right? To say, okay, these are the things that we can do. I mean, my own, and you all know this, just as God was with the Israelites for 40 years out in the wilderness, and they all wanted to return, bring us back to the melons and the garlics, or they wanted to go ahead and, send out scouts, but, there were giants there. They had to stay back in the wilderness. God is with us in our time, and we're being shaped by this time. And, I do believe in God's providence and God's grace. And I don't think God wants us to be exhausted. Okay. And so that is very wise of your group to say that, to say that do what you can right now and make some plans for the future. Because I think one of the things that this digital age is not going away, right? It is here to stay, but how we live it out is going to be different and depend upon our particular communities and how we move forward.
Thank you.
You know,
so the last, I guess, the end of our time together, I want to just tell you a little short story. So I was in a diocese, and it doesn't matter when, speaking clergy conference, and spending, just different time getting to know different clergy. And one clergy, it was like the end of this sort of thing, right? And she said, "This is all great, but I'm exhausted." Right? And she said, "I'm exhausted. And how can we do one more thing? I know," I was talking about discipleship. She's like, "I know our church needs to grow spiritually, but we're already doing this. And she named all these things. Most of them were not pointed in any way towards spiritual discipleship. None of them were bad, but they weren't pointed to that." And I said, "So is that really your goal? Is your goal, is what you feel at your core that your congregation is missing is spiritual discipleship?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, what do they like to do? What does your congregation like to actually do?" And she said, "Well, they really just like to be together. They like to just hang out together." She was doing all these community things, trying to be like the community pastor, right, in her town for all the things. And I said, "So they don't really like to go to all these things that y'all have all decided you need to go to all the time?" She's like, "Not really. They just want to be together." So what if you just spent a year and all y'all did was be together and study scripture? And that's it. You didn't worry about being the it pastor and solving global warming and solving all the crises and being out front and being on the town council and having the fanciest this or the fanciest that. What if you just hung out together for a year and talked about scripture on each other's porches and in backyards and after church and over pots of chili? And she was like, "Oh." I was like, "It's just a year. It's just a year. Try it." That's where we are. The church that's dependent on the services because you'd like the few tech people, let them go on vacation. Tell everybody to join Washington National Cathedral those Sundays. They're there. The beautiful thing is, if you can't have church, I promise you somebody else is having church. And everyone will live. We will not die from not going to our own church on one Sunday. Now, you're going to have some cranky people, and they will be okay. I promise. They will not kill you, and you will not kill them, and it will be okay. We all have those people. They send us the correction emails every week after the newsletter goes out. It will be okay. So figure out in this moment who your church is. What do they love? How can you keep doing that and go deeper into that? Maybe they love movies. Maybe they love the food pantry. Maybe they love blowing bubbles at the park. I don't know what your thing is. But that is the point of the elevator speech and the point of the assignment about making the commercial is, who are you and who is your church? And how can you offer that welcoming and that belonging? Not what somebody else is doing, not what all the cool kids who love technology are doing. Their spouses are probably very over it. Just, they don't need any more gear in their house. Who is your church? Who has God created you to be? What are the gifts of the Holy Spirit that has poured down uniquely on you that nobody else has? And how can you live into that in this time? And do that. So if I have any closing, that's just, y'all are amazing. The fact that you showed up is amazing. You've given 2 Wednesday nights to this at the end of a day, probably a long day. Thank you. You're doing great. Keep going. God's got you. Whether you feel near or far, God is with you and setting a place at the table for you. And all will be well.
He is.
Yes, join us next Wednesday, same time. We will talk about next week. We will talk about the importance of small groups, say what they are and why they're important to church. And then the following week, the 30th, we will talk about facilitating small groups.